Julianne loved the smell of turpentine more than fresh air. To her, it was the scent of resurrection, the smell of bringing history back to life in the basement studio of the museum. It was 3 a.m. and she was alone with her latest project, a 17th century portrait known simply as the Weeping Noble. The painting had been found in a walled-up cellar in France, covered in 3 centuries of grime and soot. Her job was to clean it, to strip away the yellowed varnish and reveal the true colors underneath. But for the last 3 nights, Julianne had felt a growing unease. The eyes of the nobleman in the painting seemed to shift. When she looked directly at him, he stared past her left shoulder, but when she looked at him through her peripheral vision, he seemed to be staring directly at her throat. Tonight, she was working on the background. The painting depicted a man in a velvet coat standing in front of a dark, heavy curtain. Julianne dipped her swab into the solvent mixture and began to gently rub the area behind the man's head. The dirt lifted away, staining the cotton brown, but as the grime dissolved, something strange emerged. The curtain wasn't just black paint. There was texture there, something hidden in the shadows of the background. She switched to a stronger solvent and rubbed harder. The black paint of the curtain began to dissolve, which shouldn't happen. Oil paint that old should be rock hard, but it was coming off like wet mud. Underneath the painted curtain, there was a hand. A pale, long-fingered hand resting on the nobleman's shoulder. Julianne froze. She grabbed her magnifying glass and peered closer. The hand didn't match the style of the rest of the painting. The nobleman was painted with broad, confident strokes. The hand was painted with frantic, jagged lines, as if the artist had been trembling. She moved the light closer. The nobleman wasn't standing in a pose of dignity. Now that the curtain was fading, she could see the tension in his neck. He wasn't standing still. He was being held down. The hand was gripping his shoulder with bruising force. "Who are you?" she whispered to the empty room. She knew she should stop. Restoring a painting meant cleaning it, not removing original layers. But she couldn't help herself. She had to know who the owner of the hand was. She worked feverishly for an hour, stripping away the dark curtain that dominated the background. What she revealed made her drop her scalpel. Standing behind the nobleman was a second figure. It was tall, gaunt, and wrapped in gray rags. It had no face, just a smooth patch of gray paint where a face should be. But the terrifying part was the interaction. The nobleman was looking away from the viewer because he was trying to pull away from the faceless figure. And the figure was holding a paintbrush. The gray, faceless thing was painting the nobleman. It was a painting within a painting. The gray figure was the artist, and the nobleman was its victim. A scratching sound broke the silence. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It sounded like a dry brush dragging across canvas. Julianne looked around the studio, thinking it was a rat. The sound stopped. She looked back at the painting. The gray figure had moved. Its head was no longer turned toward the nobleman. The smooth, faceless gray patch was now facing out, facing her. The paint on the canvas looked wet again. It glistened under the studio lights. The chest of the nobleman seemed to rise and fall, a microscopic heave of the canvas weave. Julianne backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. "It's the fumes. I've been inhaling solvents for 6 hours." She went to the sink to splash cold water on her face. The water ran cold and clear, shocking her senses. She dried her face with a paper towel and turned back to the easel, determined to cover the painting and go home. But the painting was empty. The background was there, the gray rags, the hand holding the brush, but the nobleman was gone. The velvet coat, the terrified face, the wig, all gone. Just empty canvas where he had stood. Julianne walked slowly toward the easel. "How?" she whispered. She reached out to touch the empty spot. The canvas was warm, not room temperature, body temperature. Suddenly, a hand shot out from the canvas. It wasn't a painted hand. It was three-dimensional, wet with oil and turpentine, and it grabbed her wrist with a grip like iron. It was the nobleman's hand. He wasn't gone. He had been pulled in, and now he was pulling her. Julianne screamed and tried to yank her arm back, but the force was impossible. She wasn't fighting a person. She was fighting the gravity of the art itself. The canvas rippled like water. The gray, faceless figure in the background began to move. It stepped forward, growing larger, until it loomed over the spot where Julianne was trapped. It raised its brush. The tip of the brush was dripping with black darkness. "No!" Julianne shrieked, clawing at the wooden frame of the easel with her free hand. Splinters dug into her nails. The gray figure brought the brush down on her arm. Where the brush touched her skin, she didn't feel pain. She felt flatness. Her arm stopped being round. It became two-dimensional. It became paint. The horror washed over her as she realized what was happening. She wasn't being eaten. She was being drafted. The figure painted rapidly, turning her struggle into a static image. Her scream was silenced as the brush swept across her mouth, sealing it with a layer of crimson oil. Her vision blurred as the brush touched her eyes, turning her three-dimensional sight into a fixed, eternal stare. The last thing Julianne felt was the smell of turpentine, overpowering and sweet, as she was flattened completely into the weave of the fabric. She tried to blink, but she couldn't. She tried to breathe, but she was made of oil and pigment. She could see the studio in front of her, frozen in a single perspective. She saw the door open. She saw the night guard walk in, flashing his light. She wanted to scream, to warn him, but she was just an image. The guard walked up to the easel. He shone his light on the canvas and frowned. "I thought she was working on a portrait of a man," he muttered to himself. He leaned in closer, inspecting the fresh, wet paint. The painting now depicted a woman in a lab coat, her face twisted in a rictus of absolute terror, her hands clawing at the frame of the canvas as if trying to escape. Behind her, in the shadows, a tall, gray, faceless figure stood calmly, its hand resting possessively on her shoulder, a fresh paintbrush in its hand. The guard shook his head, impressed by the realism. "Creepy," he whispered. He turned off the lights and walked away, leaving Julianne alone in the dark, watching the door, waiting for the paint to dry.